Welcome to another edition of Lakeville's City Council Wrap-Up. During this program, we will highlight the agenda items presented to the Lakeville City Council at their September 6th, 2016 meeting. First highlighted item on the agenda is item number 5A, Police Department Quarterly Report. And to provide the background information on this agenda item is Chief of Police Jeff Long.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Good evening. This will be the quarterly report that's going to cover the months of May through July. We had a lot of stuff happening over the last several months that I'll recap in this quarterly report. The first of which is when Officer Jim Dronin was presented with the Medal of Commendation for his work on a missing persons case, and he received the Lakeville American Legion Outstanding Officer Award. We also have transitioned to a new software, both for computer-aided dispatching and record systems within the police department, which is handled through Logis. We put every officer and every employee through that training. There's good news and bad news with that. That did affect the statistics that will be on this report because Logis is having trouble pulling some of the statistics. It's just something, it's a growing pain, but we'll get to that. Officer Nick Jacobson was selected by the Minnesota Department of Public Safety as a DWI Enforcer All-Star, and for that they invited him to a Twins game and introduced him on the field along with the other DWI All-Stars. Our reserves attended training for transporting prisoners during the summertime, which is typically the busiest time in Dakota County. Each department, or the majority of departments in Dakota County, donated either community service officers or reserve officers to work with the Sheriff's Department to transport people to jail, which would keep our officers on the street longer. Officer Fitzhenry received a military order of the Purple Heart Award in June. That was due, they hand those out to law enforcement now for people that were involved in critical incidents, and that dealt with when he was hit head-on intentionally by somebody fleeing from a domestic situation. In June, our CSOs found their way over to Lake Marion and helped some kids fish and passed out stickers and put on worms and things of that sort. It went well. Officer Shank tried something a little bit different. We were having a problem with a young girl and promised her she'd take her to get her hair done if she would just follow the rules, and she did, and Officer Shank followed through with that, and her mom was very appreciative and said she hadn't seen her daughter that happy in a long time. In June, Officers O'Neill and Dorfler and Williams trained our reserves at the Central Maintenance Facility on defensive driving. In July, officers and CSOs and firefighters attended the Miracle League baseball game at King Park. Of course, as most people know, the 50th anniversary of Panaprog came and went, and that went very well. Officer Carrie Wachorek started on July 5th. She came to us from the Metro Transit Police Organization. She's the daughter of a person involved in the Rotary. I'll leave that name off for now. In July, we hit 6,000 likes on our Facebook page, so that's a big deal for us. That's a lot of people looking at our Facebook. We had 90+ neighborhoods participate in National Night Out on August 2nd. So a lot of good things happening over the last quarter. I'll just go over some notable cases that we had. We had a fentanyl overdose. A deceased male was found on the intersection of 46 and Galaxy. It's a handful of opioid-related overdoses that we've seen this summer. We had a shots fired call. A person was upset with somebody that was bothering them, so they fired off a couple of rounds to scare them away. That's against the law. Can't do that. We had a 4th-degree domestic assault. This is show what some of our officers go through. Juvenile suspect hit our officer with a landscaping rock on the side of the head during the fight. Very lucky he didn't lose consciousness. He did end up at the hospital, but was okay. I put this call in here because I think it is a sign of what we're doing today and how we're de-escalating situations and how things have changed in the last 30 years or so. This was a mental health crisis call, and the officer spent over an hour negotiating with this person to go with paramedics. No use of force was used, no weapons were used. They take a long time, but I just thought this was a good sign of what we're doing to de-escalate situations. And you always need to keep your kids close to you when you're in the store. So this is where we run into a little trouble with our new system. I don't have any comparative stats for Egan or Woodbury because they can't pull their statistics either currently, but we can count some of them. So it's It's a step backwards, which will eventually be a step forward, but this is how we're looking. I can get statistics through May for some of our typical response to citizens. Nothing dramatic. Medicals are up, animal calls, suspicious person calls, which I say is a great thing to see up because that means people are calling us when they see things that maybe aren't right, and we constantly encourage people to do that. Again, these numbers are all through May. As the council well knows, it's been a very busy summer. I wish I had the statistics to relay, but I don't. Our average response time has gone up just slightly. Again, I mentioned this at my last quarterly report. With summer coming up, we were obviously going to see those numbers increasing, and they have increased. And hopefully by the next quarterly report, we'll have those numbers. So again, this only goes through May. We're at for traffic crashes, speed citations, and DUIs. The DUI is interesting. We changed DUI officers for our grant. The numbers were a little bit down with the officer that was assigned, so we changed out officers, and I think you're going to see that number spike. It's going to probably end up higher than last year. Traffic stops. I don't think you could get any closer for this past quarter. That's good. This is from our traffic unit, which, as you know, is one officer. Conducted 577 traffic stops, 333 warnings, 239 warnings, a little over 300 citations, 11 arrests, and spent 94 hours just going to places that residents called about, what we call directed patrol. And I always like to put these up. These are just different screenshots of our city of where traffic stops are being made. As you can see, they typically are centered around busier roads because that's where the cut-through traffic is happening, but you see we're getting back into the neighborhoods. The red spots are where the accidents are, so we're obviously giving those areas extra patrol. And there you go again. Now this is a yearly summary of our street crimes unit. I thought I would throw this in here because I was short on other statistics, and I thought what they did is pretty cool. So from June of 15 to June of 16, our street crimes people often say, well, what did they do? It's Lakeville. Well, they made 112 arrests. Of those, some of the highlights were 25 were narcotics, 8 were search warrants, 28 were warrant arrests, and 13 were related to sex crime arrests. As I've made the council aware, we are looking at reverse stings and trying to get people that are trafficking, involved in human trafficking off the streets. So they've been working hard. This just compares us to our surrounding cities where we're at for total calls, a little above Burnsville, a little behind Egan. And this is year to date. And as the council knows, we changed our mission statement to focus a little bit more on what we're doing now, and this is the current statement, and I'll just read it. But the Lakeville Police Department exists to ensure an excellent quality of life in Lakeville by serving and protecting its citizens in a professional and innovative way.
Next highlighted item on the agenda is item number 7, public hearing to consider granting a cable television franchise to Frontier Communications. And to provide the information on this agenda item is City of Lakeville cable attorney Brian Grogan.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Again, for the record, Brian Grogan with the Minneapolis law firm of Moss & Barnett. Don't know if staff had any initial introductory comments. Okay. We're going to move in with a presentation. Can everyone see that okay on their monitors? Yep. Okay. And I'll have to make sure I know how to advance this.
Just click the button.
Just click the forward button? Okay, very good. So starting off, Federal Cable Act. We talked about this at the last meeting where I'd like to provide a little background about what the Cable Act specifically provides with respect to a competitive cable television franchise. So one of the stated purposes of the Cable Act is to promote competition in the cable communications industry, minimize unnecessary regulation that would impose an undue economic burden on cable systems. Let's see, can I just say advance here? There we go. A franchising authority may award one or more franchises within its jurisdiction, except that a franchising authority, that's you, the City of Lakeville, may not grant an exclusive franchise and may not unreasonably refuse to award an additional competitive franchise. So your standard of review, if you're looking for that tonight, this is a quasi-judicial proceeding when you're considering a competitive franchise, is one of reasonableness as you move forward. A little bit of background about Charter Communications, because they are the incumbent cable operator. And as I'll describe in a moment, we do have a provision in state law that requires a level playing field as it relates to certain provisions that are contained in Charter's franchise. So I want to give a little background about where we stand with them. We have an existing franchise that was actually granted back in November of 1998, so quite a long time ago, well in excess of the 15-year term that it was granted for, but this council has extended it now. Most recent extension will expire in December 31 of 2016. So we're still operating under that existing 1998 franchise. It was a non-exclusive franchise. At any time over the last 18 years, cities had the opportunity to engage a competitor if you chose. In 2011 through 2013, Charter requested a renewal of its franchise, and the city went ahead and performed a needs assessment, which is a requirement of the Cable Act to figure out what it is that we want that franchise to include for the next franchise term. In 2014, Charter was part of a transaction that would result in a transfer of control of this system. So there was a little pause in the action. You may remember Twin Cities Marketplace as a whole was being potentially going to switch out, where Comcast was going to buy Time Warner, a new company was going to come in. We did a review at that time of that proposed transfer. Eventually, Comcast's transaction was denied, and Charter has gone on to acquire Time Warner Communications, which resulted in another transfer approval by the city in 2015. In 2015, the city agreed to another extension of the franchise, and that was with certain conditions related to the movement of our PEG channels. And then in 2016, yet another extension that again expires at the end of this year. Switching from Charter to the Frontier background, which is the proposal that you're considering this evening, they actually requested a franchise in March of this year. In April, we began the process required by state law. In May, they submitted their application. In June, we held a public hearing to consider that application. May through August, we actually started negotiating with Frontier. It's important to keep in mind that the document that we negotiated with Frontier on, that's in your packet this evening, is the exact same document that we sent to Charter as part of the franchise renewal negotiations with Charter. So the goal has always been from staff to try to align these two companies so that they can be competing with the same franchise on the same general terms and conditions. Now, in fairness, Charter is still operating under the 1998 franchise. We expect to be completing with the renewal with them shortly, hopefully by year end. So there is a little bit of a cart and horse here. We have to update that franchise from 1998, again, provided both companies identical copies. Frontier happens to have completed those negotiations first, and it's not surprising in that they're driving to be in the marketplace. Charter, already in the marketplace, continues to operate even if an agreement can't be reached. City staff continued those negotiations with Frontier, and in August, we generally completed those negotiations, or at least came close to that. It was at that time, earlier, on, I believe, August 15th, I appeared before this city council, and we considered a resolution regarding Frontier's qualifications. We had considerable discussion that evening. Ultimately, the city did pass a resolution that found Frontier had possessed the qualifications on the legal, technical, and financial to own and operate a cable system in the city. Ultimately, we finished those negotiations about 10 days later with Frontier. We took the proposed franchise that's in your packet to your cable board. I know a representative of the cable board is here this evening and likely will speak at your public hearing. The cable board unanimously recommended the adoption of the Frontier franchise that's before you. Again, the goal of your city staff was substantially similar franchise terms for all operators that do business in the city. We looked at not only the existing franchise that you have with Charter, but we also looked at the needs and interests that the city identified back as part of the renewal proceedings, because we're looking forward at this franchise, not backwards, keeping in mind that we have a legal obligation, of course, to maintain parity to the extent possible. The renewal with Charter, again, is yet to be completed, but we're hoping to complete that soon. This particular franchise that's in your packet, let's get down to the specific key terms in it. It's a 5-year franchise. The Charter franchise was a 15-year franchise. Why did we only include a 5-year term? Because we're tying the franchise term to the build-out obligations that we've required Frontier to meet in the contract. I'm going to describe those in greater detail in a moment. So they are on a 5-year term. If, at the end of those 5 years, this city council is satisfied that they have complied with the terms of this contract, you have a unilateral trigger that allows you to extend this franchise for another 5 years, resulting in a full 10-year franchise term, which has become more of the standard franchise length even in renewals. Most cities are not going with a 15-year length anymore. That trigger does not operate to the benefit of Frontier. In other words, Frontier has no ability to unilaterally extend this. Only the city council has that right. If you're unsatisfied, they would go through a renewal proceeding, and you would be looking at whether they complied with the franchise, presumably specifically the build-out. If they've met those qualifications, you can ignore that process and just extend for 5 years, avoiding the cost and expense of it. We believe that's a very favorable provision for the city. Again, it's tied to system construction. Part of this proceeding, we had the benefit, of course, of getting input from a variety of parties, including Charter Communications. One thing you may recall from letters that Charter sent back in June of this year was specific concern about whether Frontier would be building out the whole city or whether they would only be building out pieces of the city. We have, as part of this agreement, mandated that Frontier meet every state statutory requirement to substantially build out the whole city within 5 years. Why do we use the words substantially constructed? That's an issue that comes up when you look at this state statute. In part, it's because that's identical language to what our state law requires. They have to commence construction within 270 days of the effective date of the franchise. They have to build out at a rate of no less than 50 miles per year, and they have to substantially complete construction within 5 years. If you're looking for a general description of what substantial completion means, in a construction standpoint, it means that the owner generally is able to occupy or utilize the project, the facility, for its intended use. Now, how does that apply to a cable operator building a cable system in a city over a 5-year term? I guess we'd have to look at the intent of that state statute. There is not much legislative history going back 30 years when this statute was adopted, nor is there any case law that I was able to locate on this. There is some relevant case law looking at the award of a franchise, but not specifically on build-out. So we do have a provision that's going to be subject to some interpretation by the council and by the various parties. We felt that the safest path to take was to tie it directly to the state statute. Specifically on build-out, Frontier is authorized to provide service throughout the entire city, identical to what Charter's authorization is. They have to meet the state law build-out requirements, and let's look at those in detail. This language, comma for comma, is identical to what you'll see in your contract. Again, construction of the cable system has to commence no later than 240 days after the effective date. That's right out of the statute. Construction shall proceed at a reasonable rate of not less than, again, that is a minimum, not a maximum, not less than 50 plant miles. Again, state statutory requirement. They have to complete it or substantially complete it within 5 years of the grant, and you can only waive these requirements based on unforeseen events or acts of God. Again, identical out of the statute. And frankly, identical to what Charter requested that the city impose upon Frontier in its letters of June 6, 2016. On top of those build-out requirements, we've imposed a quarterly meeting obligation where Frontier representatives will have to come in and meet with city staff and show their progress on this. So we have a way to track this, to see how this construction is moving forward. They'll make available confidential maps. Of course, they want to retain those as trade secret, but they'll allow staff to review those and verify compliance with the franchise obligations. In addition to that build-out, those build-out requirements, Frontier has to comply with the FCC customer service standards. Those are set forth both in the franchise as well as in your city code. You have Title III of your city code that includes some rather significant provisions as it relates to cable communications. They are obligated, just like Charter is, to meet every one of those obligations. PEG channels, another issue that's usually specifically local and unique to any given city. In this case, Frontier's agreed to provide 5 PEG channels. They're going to provide those on or before February 1st, 2017. Why the delay? Because they're not going to be ready to provide these. They have to certainly install facilities to get to City Hall. They have to make the connections. They have to get the equipment. This falls well within the 270-day time period that the state law requires, and it was as soon as we felt reasonable in order to get the mandate imposed. They will go beyond what we're requiring of Charter today in that they'll provide all of these channels in both standard definition and high definition across the board for all the channels. They're going to match the identical PEG fee, which is the financial support that Charter has been remitting to the city. They'll match it identically. We also added a provision to say that if in renewal we agree to a Charter PEG fee over 50 cents, or frankly less than 50 cents, all we have to do is notify Frontier, and within 90 days they have to change their billing practices to match what we agree to with Charter. So you lock in at Charter's rate, you get the benefit of any increase or decrease that may occur on those PEG channels as the council determines. We put a cap in there of 1.5%. You might say, why 1.5%? That happens to be the highest level of PEG fee that I'm personally aware of that Charter remits in the state of Minnesota. So we put that in there as a ceiling, recognizing that it's unlikely we're going to rise above that as the city of Lakeville. Again, we had a specific language, and it's required in state law that the PEG fee always has to be the same for both operators. We can never favor one operator over another. Recall that I mentioned the transfer proceeding with respect to Charter in an earlier slide. Why do I bring that up? Because as part of that transfer proceeding, we agreed to allow Charter to relocate our PEG channels to higher channel numbers. That was an issue that this council grappled with. Ultimately, we agreed upon that, and the PEG channels were relocated in the 180 series of numbers. We requested that Frontier put their channels in the same area so that we would have some similarity between where the PEG channels are in Charter's system and where they are in Frontier's. I've listed for you here where these locations will be. They're not identical to what Charter is, but they're in the exact same channel neighborhood. Frontier is required to provide complimentary cable service to your schools and public buildings. There was a letter issued today by Charter that I expect Charter will provide some additional comments for us on, raising some concerns about this particular issue. Let me be clear that they are required, Frontier, to provide not just standard definition, but high definition services. So actually a level beyond what we currently impose upon Charter. It is actually a more burdensome obligation with both equipment and service to all of the various buildings, public buildings, schools, and to City Hall. Currently with Charter, we are receiving free service, but we are remitting payment for the equipment. In this case, Frontier has committed to provide both of those free. There's concern about when would these be imposed, how quickly. Staff actually asked Frontier to go out, this was several weeks back, to review each of these locations and determine how quickly they could be assigned. Within that initial time period, when they're going to turn up service, more than half of the buildings on the same exhibit that's in your franchise came back as being passed by their system and capable of receiving service. But there is an FCC order that encourages that cities not duplicate these kinds of obligations, whether it be institutional obligations or other obligations where there's no benefit provided. So what we've included is a provision that if we want service to a police station, and Charter is currently there, we would basically inform Charter, you no longer have that obligation, Frontier, you have that obligation. And the goal will be that as their system is constructed and built out, the city will impose equal and uniform public building obligations across the board. Remember too, these are mandatory throughout the 5-year franchise term. These are not voluntary commitments by Frontier. They're contractually bound to provide these services. Just a couple more slides. Other franchise terms, we have, I think, more aggressive reporting obligations imposed on Frontier than what we're currently requiring of Charter. We have very similar enforcement obligations. We have a letter of credit. We have liquidated damages. All of our right-of-way provisions are tied back to our city code. If the city code should be amended, they'll have to comply with those amendments going forward.
Item number 7 was approved by the Lakeville City Council. Well, those were the highlighted items presented to the council at their September 6th, 2016 meeting. If you have any questions or comments regarding these agenda items, please feel free to call City Hall. The number is 952-985-4400. Thanks for watching this edition of Lakeville City Council Wrap-Up. The curtain is going up for this year's season at the Lakeville Area Performing Arts Center. And this year, there's something for everyone. From a wide array of musical stylings to holiday seasonal performances, the Lakeville Area Performing Arts Center offers the finest in regional entertainment. Reserve seating for all performances. To find program descriptions and buy tickets online, visit our website at lakevilleareaartscenter.com.